Hi all, happy Monday. Welcome to The Wife of Caesar. As you know, The Wife of Caesar is Streiner's project to talk about corruption or anti-corruption using everyday words so that we can fight corruption in our day-to-day lives with a little bit more than just good intentions. Okay, what is Streiner? Streiner is a bureau that specializes in the fight against corruption. So essentially think of us as a group of people that help organizations fight corruption within. As with every show, we will have a piece of news, a case, and a typology. In today's news, we will talk about Rafael Correa. Now, Rafael Correa was the former president of Ecuador, and he is accused of bribery and related to, you guessed it, the Odebrecht case. He is now being chased, or he now has an outstanding warrant for his arrest issued by Interpol, so it should be a matter of time before we see him brought to trial. Now, to give you a little bit of background, Correa was the president of Ecuador between 2007 and 2017, so about 10 years. Now, you should know that presidential terms in Ecuador do not last 10 nor 5 years, so his term was rather irregular, and he's been involved or implicated in irregular situations, quasi-illegal or quasi-legal situations for quite some time. In this case, he's being accused of accepting bribes from Odebrecht itself. And the breakthrough in the case came from Ms. Pamela Martinez, who was a former advisor of President Correa. And she submitted evidence. She obviously was implicated in the scheme to commit bribery in this large scale. And she submitted evidence to the prosecution in the form of several documents and different types of evidence, but the most notable of which was a WhatsApp conversation. And in those messages was revealed how the president and his inner circle was related with Odebrecht and it was involved in corrupt dealings with Odebrecht. Allegedly, again, these are still allegations, allegedly Odebrecht gave the government of Correa around $2.5 million to distribute to his political party, Alianza País. This shouldn't be forward, it should be former, sorry about that. Also implicated are his former vice president and other high-ranking officials, mostly at the level of Secretary of State. So this is a serious corruption scheme that is being dismantled. The corruption network was revealed as a result of an investigative report or a report of investigative journalism known as Arroz Verde, which literally means green rice, a dish that is famous in Ecuador. And it was called this way because it alluded to a recipe for the dish, because the documents that were revealed or that came to light were pretty much outlined how this scheme was constructed and carried out, much like a recipe. Among the pieces of evidence submitted were ledgers, just think of them as notebooks, and each ledger contained details for the dispersion of bribes. So Odebrecht would give the bribe to someone allegedly give the bribe to someone in the government, and that person was in charge of giving it to a particular public official or several public officials or the political party. Now, the way it worked, it was an encoded ledger. And so you would have found something like this. CC, let's say that it stood for construction company, would give a bribe to SP. That stood for Señor Presidente or Mr. President. That's actually the real key code that they used. Or maybe SP received money and gave it to SS for Secretary of State, something like that. And this reminds us very much of the case that was built against Al Capone in the 30s. Because the key to unfurling Capone's bribery scheme was his accountant, the person who cooked the books, who actually knew who held the key or the conversion, the key to what each code stood for. And that person in this case is Ms. Martinez. Okay. Former President Correa stands to be sentenced to up to 15 years in prison, but that is only for the corruption scheme. He is implicated in other investigations. He has been charged 12 times or charged for 12 different crimes, among which is kidnapping. He is accused of kidnapping a journalist from Colombia and allegedly participating in his torture and murder. So Again, these are all allegations, but he has been implicated in several criminal schemes, or several criminal schemes. And as usual, we will keep an eye out for you, and we will let you know as soon as these allegations turn into concrete accusations, or he is actually found guilty of these crimes. Okay, let's move on to the case. Today we have Chechnya. As you know, Transparency International, the international watchdog for corruption, an NGO that's very, very famous in the anti-corruption world, it just turned 25. And to commemorate this event, they released a list of the 25 most notorious corruption cases, and we are doing a rundown of that list for you. So today we have the case of Chechnya. Now, a little bit of background. Chechnya is a republic. It's not that it isn't a country, it's kind of a weird legal situation. So let's think of it this way. It is a nation, it is a republic, it has its own government, but it does answer to the government of Russia, the federal government of Russia. Now, Chechnya has a very complex history concerning its independence and several acts of violence and revolutions. Chechnya is a very complicated country, and we will not try to explain it in one episode. However, what's relevant for you is that you understand that it's a complex country with a complex history. In 2015, Vladimir Putin teamed up with Mr. Ahmad Kadyrov, and they seized control of Chechnya, and that was when Chechnya was able to be folded into the Russian Republic. Remember this name because it will be relevant in a few seconds. Now, the scandal. There is within Chechnya a public fund that is known as the Ahmad Kadyrov, apologies, should be an O right there, Kadyrov Regional Public Fund. It sounds very institutional, but it really isn't. Now, the way it works, is this a sovereign fund? Kind of, maybe, but not really. You remember that we talked about what sovereign funds are. Essentially, large sums of money that a country invests and whose profits serve the people of the country, sometimes used for retirement funds and things like that. This is not a sovereign fund because it's not regulated, and it's highly irregular. So it is money that belongs to the country and that comes from the people of the country, but it's not regulated, so we can't really qualify it as a sovereign fund. It's kind of a weird miasmic thing. Now, the way it works is if you have a salary in Chechnya, you have to pay a tax. And that tax varies from person to person. If you're, say, a public official, you only have to pay around 10% of your monthly salary. But if you're a business owner, then you have to pay upwards of 50% of your income, which is totally crazy. So again, the fund is very questionable, mostly because it is about a third, it represents about 1/3 of the income of the Chechen government, between 600 and 900 millions annually. So a lot of money. Now, why is it not really a sovereign fund? Is it regulated? No, it doesn't have a regulation. Sovereign funds have to be somewhat regulated, mostly according to the laws of each country, but essentially you have to know the rules under which the fund works, under which the fund is created, and under which the fund operates. If you don't have that, it's just a large sum of money, but it doesn't really have any real accountability. What is it used for? Okay, mostly for public spaces. Now, Chechnya is mostly a Muslim country, and money in this fund has gone in many times to building mosques. So it has been used to something that allegedly benefits the people, or at least it's used by the people. Also, Chechnya very famously contributed humanitarian aid to Somalia on many occasions, and to aid in that country's food problem. So humanitarian aid, again, also a good thing. But money in the fund is also used for parties. Yeah, you wouldn't have guessed it, but yeah. Now, this is the actual, the quid of the scandal. You remember how I mentioned the name Kadyrov? Now, that was Ahmad Kadyrov, who teamed up with Putin. Now we're going to talk about Mr. Ramzan Kadyrov. Mr. Ramzan Kadyrov is the former prime minister of Chechnya and is currently the head of the republic. Again, Chechnya doesn't have a president because it is, a federal subject to Russia. But the head of state in Chechnya, the most powerful bureaucrat in Chechnya, is the head of the republic, in this case, Mr. Ramzan Kadyrov. He is the son of Ahmad Kadyrov, the person who seized control with and alongside Putin. And he has had around 10 assassination attempts. That's not a reflection on him, but rather a reflection on how complicated Chechnya is. Here's the interesting part. Ramzan Kadyrov has been sanctioned in the US under the Magnitsky Act. The so-called Magnitsky Act is a law in the US that aims to provide countervailing measures to violations of human rights that took place in Russia or in relation with Russia. It's named after Mr. Sergei Magnitsky, a former lawyer who was killed and tortured in a very infamous prison in Moscow. And this law allows the US government to impose sanctions upon Russian citizens. Now, what type of sanctions? Sometimes restrictions on travel, restrictions to do business, things like that. And why is Ramzan Kadyrov being sanctioned by the US under the Magnitsky Act? Just, minor run-of-the-mill things. Torture, just nothing. Extrajudicial killings. He decided that he doesn't like the gay agenda and he doesn't like homosexuals, so he carried out an anti-gay purge, killing off homosexuals. Just nothing, minor things. And other human rights violations. So yeah, he is at least a very questionable person. Now, let's move on to the actual scandal. In 2011, Ramzan Kadyrov turned 35, and to celebrate, he threw a party. In that party was paid with the sovereign fund, the quasi-sovereign fund of the people. And he had a boxing session with none other than Mr. Mike Tyson. There's a picture right here, sourced by Vestnik Kavkaz, but if you look it up, just use Google, and you'll find several pictures of the two of them laughing and hanging out together. They claim never to have met, which is very weird. That boxing session set back the fund $2 million. In that party, several celebrities were invited and in attendance, and one of the other major lavish expenditures that happened was that a motorcycle club was in attendance, and Kadyrov decided to make a gift of 16 motorcycles to the club, all paid for by the fund. So yeah, terrible, horrible thing. Now, how has this been prosecuted or adjudicated in Chechnya? It hasn't. No punishment, no fines, no nothing. The Kadyrovs get to spend sovereign money at their will. Research for the case was provided by our own Laura Paola Villa. Thank you for that. And let's move on to the typology. All right, today's typology deals with free ports and comes at us courtesy of Mr. Bobby Axelrod from the show Billions.
Business at hand?
I believe I can do you some more good, Axe. Let me tell you what a free port is.
A storage facility at a private airport where valuables purchased overseas can be stored and deemed perpetually in transit so the customs duties and sales tax can be avoided.
So you do know.
Okay, what are free ports? Well, as he very aptly put it, these are storage facilities that have special tax treatment. Essentially, they don't have to pay the same taxes that other storage facilities have. Now, they are located inside what we call special economic zones, and these are pieces of a country that, for the purpose of customs and tax, we think of them, or we pretend that they are not inside of the country, because then they would generate taxes and the movement of goods would be very, very difficult. Without them, these are actually a good thing, because without special economic zones, then every item that sets foot in every country would have to pay tax, and then international trade would be untenable, would be impossible. So special economic zones are actually a good thing. Now, within these zones, mostly private entities rent out space and build, storage facilities, warehouses, just glorified warehouses, and items are stored there. And when they are stored there, they are technically still in transit. They are still moving, and the rule is that when goods are in movement, you can't tax them. So you can store them, as Mr. Axelrod aptly put it, indefinitely. What's the major controversy with free ports? Well, in addition to aiding tax evasion, they are often used or abused to store stolen art. I'll give you an example. The Geneva free port that's been in the news, in many news reports because of this scandal, allegedly holds several collections, huge collections of arts, some of them allegedly stolen. It holds one particular collection that by a certain Russian oligarch that allegedly consists of 100 works of art, all done by Picasso. It allegedly holds The Last Da Vinci, several works by Klimt, Greco, Rothko, and individual collections that are worth well over $2 billion in the same building. And again, these buildings, I mean, you would have to prove that the actual works of art are actually there. And as you saw from the video, that you might be storing replicas and keeping the real pieces of art in your home, and avoiding taxes, or actually aiding and abetting criminals that are in the business of stealing and fencing stolen art. So it's all very questionable. Thank you for joining us. That's it for today. Thank you for joining us. I will leave you, as I always do, with this. Please raise your voice. Corruption should be denounced. If you witness an act of corruption, raise your voice, blow the whistle, but do it safely. If you're not sure whether or not what you're looking at is corruption, or you're not sure that you're entirely safe, don't do anything. Reach out to someone who can help you. Feel free to reach out to us at info@streiner.mx, or visit streiner.mx, where you will find detailed instructions to making a report via the dark web. Absolutely safe, absolutely anonymous, but above all, stay safe. Again, this was The Wife of Caesar. My name is Michel Levien, or Michel Levien. Either is fine. Thank you for joining us, and have a happy Monday.